and we'll see if more people join. I'm Linda Tortorelli. I've been with the autism program at the University of Illinois for over 15 years now. We have also Jeannie Kramer. Say hello.
Hello.
Hey. Jeannie has been with the autism program for a couple of years now, and this year she has taken over my position, which I'm thrilled about. So I'm still staying on and working as a consultant and doing trainings, which is a great place to be. So really
I'm still thrilled about. So I'm so thrilled that you're still here.
Yeah, so it's working out really well. Jeannie started with us a couple of years ago when we received funding from Microsoft to work on improving the soft skills of university students for their talent pipeline. So they recognize they have some autism hiring initiative, and that started several years ago, and they were trying to see what could be done to improve those soft skills before they came into the employment realm with them. So that's where Jeannie came in. She is does a lot of work. She's a speech pathologist and does a lot of work with executive function remediation. And so we're thrilled to have her. And she's been working with those university students for several years now, a couple of years now anyway. And we could, since it's just going to be a couple of us, and again, anybody else that would like to turn their cameras on, it's so much easier for me to talk to your faces if you really don't mind. I don't want to invade your privacy, so I respect that entirely, but man, is it hard to do this work talking to the air. So thanks for letting me see your faces this evening. It really is less taxing. Otherwise, it just feels like I don't even know if I'm talking to this wall behind me. So thanks for that. Okay, so that's just a little bit about us, and we'll get going. By the end, we're going to give an overview of all this post-secondary college accommodations and supports and educational programs that are out there, and also then how do you fund this? So there's some unique funding opportunities because of being a person with a disability, as long as you're willing to disclose that. We're going to talk about disclosure and how tough that can be for some, but the benefits that come with disclosure. Okay, so there's similarities and differences in the college experience. So you can think about, colleges with accommodations and supports, and that's what the University of Illinois would be, and Parkland would be if you're from this area. And then there's, there's a familiar face. I know this person. I'll give her a second to get in because I know she is also interested in college stuff. Okay, Colleen, if you could hear us, welcome. We're just getting started. We were stalling a couple of minutes, hoping a few more people would join us. And Colleen, I totally respect everybody's privacy for not turning your cameras on, but it is easier for me to talk to people with their faces because we have such a small group. So if you're willing to turn your camera on, that would be great. Thanks, Colleen. I appreciate that.
Sure.
We just got started. So we're talking about colleges with accommodations, and then there's these post-secondary education programs that, and some of the differences of those, again, college with accommodations is University of Illinois, Parkland College, but there's a lot of these post-secondary education programs that are started, and they might have a modified curriculum, more intensive supports. They might just get a certificate without a diploma and not college credits. So is anybody here interested in those programs at all tonight? Are you really on the college track, everybody that's here? Sounds like
I think
you're really looking for like a 4-year college experience, everybody that's here. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll talk a little bit about both just to let you broaden your horizons. We never know who you might also be able to educate, but we'll definitely focus on really those 4-year, 2 and 4-year experiences with a diploma. So again, these examples, U of I, Parkland, Eastern, and then Harper College is up in the Chicagoland area, and they're a 2-year college experience, but they have, sometimes you can have a 2 or 4-year college that also has autism specific programs in them. And so Eastern Illinois does, they have an autism program there. Harper is a really good junior college that has this called Transition Autism Program. That's called TAP. Nothing to do with me, TAP, or the TAP program. It just, that's what it stands for. And I've known several people that have gone through that and rave about it at the junior college level. Marshall University has an autism program, RIT. If you're Andrea, you mentioned that your son was really into math and computers and that kind of thing. RIT is probably, and Jeannie, you can please join the conversation, probably the best when it comes to their autism program and what they offer for students, because it is so comprehensive. And RIT is a co-op school in general, which means that all the students, no matter what their major is, have to do, they call them co-ops, you could call them internships. And for engineering, I think they have to do 3 of them throughout their university experience. So they get so much work experience along with their diploma that they're uniquely qualified to start the workforce. And when we were starting to work with Microsoft and went out to Seattle and met with them, and I asked them at that time, and that was several years ago now, was there one program that stood out to them that their students were the most prepared for work? And they said RIT. And we've gotten the privilege to meet these folks several times. We just finished the College Autism Network conference, and they're really amazing. So if you've got a strong engineering math person and we're looking for a private school, and needed an autism support program, there's several out there, but there's none better than that. In contrast of post-secondary experiences, so Heartland College, that's over in Bloomington, that's called the HALO program. Elmhurst College, Lewis and Clark College, college internship program, University of Iowa's REACH program, and PACE at National Louis. Those post-secondary experiences are more geared to individuals that have an intellectual disability, along with their autism, maybe a mild to moderate. So like at University of Iowa, it is really a separate program for people with intellectual and cognitive and learning disabilities. And same with PACE at National Louis, even though the students live in the dorms at DePaul and get to do a lot of cool things, but they are not on a track for just a traditional 4-year university. So very interesting and exciting times that there's the idea that post-secondary education can be for a much broader range of individuals, not just people that, we traditionally think about, but people with intellectual and cognitive disabilities can go on to have post-secondary experiences as well. So who can help guide you on post-secondary options? Well, in theory, your guidance counselor, your IEP case manager, or your special education teacher. So you'll see some of these advocacy tips throughout. Set up a meeting with the guidance counselor, invite the counselor to the IEP meeting to talk about post-secondary options. I would love to know more current experiences. I have not attended transition IEPs for a long time, but I traditionally, the counselors in this area haven't been the most adept at knowing about these programs, but if you're having different experiences, I'd be thrilled to hear about it and would be happy to know. But they're supposed to be the ones that are keeping up on what's going on. So we're going to talk about traditional college accommodations and supports. So, the law that governs accessibility, the Americans with Disability Act, in 1990, the ADA civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including schools, covers state-funded schools such as universities, community colleges, and vocational schools. So important to know, state-funded schools are covered by the ADA. It covers private colleges as well and vocational schools in certain areas. Section 504, the Rehab Act. So those of you that have students still in high school might have a 504 plan, or they might have an IEP, but there are not IEPs in college, but there are 504 accommodations because it's covered under the Rehab Act of 1973. And we will give you all this PowerPoint presentation. Jeannie will email that to you when we're done. Or can email it. I don't know if she can email it now. I don't know if we're that tricky, but we'll be happy to get it to you. So, so Section 504 works with the ADA and IDA to protect children and adults with disabilities from exclusion and unequal treatment in schools, jobs, and the community, and it must provide equal access to classrooms. It covers schools that receive federal dollars, regardless of whether the school is private or public. So those are the laws that allow for these accommodations. So who is covered under 504? The law applies to a qualified individual with a disability. The provision defines qualified individual as those with a physical or mental condition that substantially restricts one or more major life activities. And then here's the list of all those areas: neurological, emotional, and mental, learning disabilities, organs, respiratory, brain syndromes, skeletal problems, digestive ailments. So all those can be covered and are defined in section 504. So let's talk about admission requirements for a minute. So to be admitted to college, your child will have to meet the technical and academic qualifications that are for entry into the school or the program or activity. And there is no need to disclose disability during the admission process. And they should just apply, as if they don't have any kind of disability during the admission process, and just get accepted on their own standing. You're not disclosing your disability at that point. So to be in compliance with ADA, colleges cannot have eligibility requirements that screen out people with disabilities, or ask applicants if they have a history of mental illness or any other disability, or serve students with disabilities differently because it believes its insurance costs will be increased. So colleges can't ask you those questions. And again, that is not the time to disclose during the application process. So what are your students' rights for college admission? Again, there cannot be a limit or proportion of people with disabilities who are admitted. They can't say, well, we're only going to take 100 of you type, they can't do that. There can't be a test or criteria that can be used that discriminates against a person with a disability. And criteria must reflect the aptitude of the person rather than their sensory, manual, or speaking limitations. So what are colleges required to do for students with disability? Well, the programs, including extracurricular activities, must be accessible to students with disabilities. Colleges can do this by providing architectural access, like ramps, providing aids and services that are necessary for effective communication. So maybe an interpreter, maybe a amplification system. They can modify to some extent their policies and practices and procedures so that they don't discriminate, but there's a limit on how much can be modified. So accommodations versus a modification. So accommodations are generally less costly. They're usually easier to get. They don't require an alteration of the content of the curriculum. And they don't usually require a lot of pre-planning, and that's how we have to help faculty and staff understand we're asking for these accommodations and it's not going to take you thousands of hours to make them. But modifications can be more expensive. They're harder to get. They may require alternating the content or assessment and require a lot of pre-planning. We were having trouble. This wasn't the YouTube that I showed before. Let me see if we can show it. If not, you'll have to just watch it when you get it. Doesn't look like I'm going to have sound again. No. No. Okay. We just don't know why we're not getting sound on our YouTube tonight, but it doesn't matter. Okay, we'll go on. All right, academic accommodations. Some of those, again, like I said, sound amplification aids, note-taking services, extra time on exams, speech-to-text software. This is one of the things Microsoft was working on that we weren't involved in, but was also part of this initiative in the classroom. Priority class registration, accessible testing locations, sign language interpreters. So if you plan to apply for academic adjustments, it's important to learn about your college's disability procedures in advance so you can receive assistive services and tools in time for your courses. So when you're looking at colleges, you do want to go talk to your disability office, but they're not going to be communicating with the admissions office, so it's okay to go and you should find out how disability offices work and have those conversations with them. But you don't have to worry about about, that then they're going to know who your kiddo is in the admission process. But you definitely want to start early, finding out what's available and get a sense of those disability offices. And Jeannie, again, if you want to add anything from your experiences, please do about engaging with them.
I do want to pop on about that. I have a college freshman who's on the autism spectrum, and it was interesting to go through that process of college visits with him. We made appointments at the disability offices or the accommodations offices wherever we visited, and there were a couple places where they were like, "No, I'm sorry, parents can't come into the meeting." And so really preparing and working with your child, your teenager, to prep them for that meeting, tell them what to be prepared for. There are colleges, most universities are very private and do not want parents involved at all in the process. So, at one point, Jack had to give permission for me to come in, but having that, worked out beforehand, like I might not be able to come in, so this is what you're going to need to do and ask and whatever. Yeah, it can get it. They can be very private.
Yeah,
so.
Good tip. So the cost is nothing to the student. An institution cannot cap its spending on these auxiliary devices or services, and it can't refuse, devices due to funding if they are needed, except unless the device causes undue financial burden. Services, so, that becomes a discussion if it's very expensive. Services must be provided unless doing so would result in a fundamental alteration of the program or would result in undue financial administrative burdens. So, the sky isn't the limit here, folks. They have to be reasonable, and that is open to interpretation. Again, your student is not going to get any fundamental alteration. They're not going to be able to skip their homework. They're not going to be able to, not do part of the curriculum because it's too hard for them. They are going to have to do everything like everybody else does, but they might have more time to do it. They might be able to take their tests in another place, but there isn't a boatload of accommodations for people on the spectrum, unfortunately, that you can really access. Section 504 does not provide for attendance. They will not provide a one-on-one. Even if you have a physical disability, that is extra. You would have to pay for those personal attendants to take care of your personal needs, or individually prescribed devices, or readers for personal use or study, or other devices or services of a personal nature. They doesn't cover that. It's important to remember that the curriculum and course requirements will not be altered, and accommodations are put in place to provide equal access to learning and do not guarantee success. They're at the college level, they're focused on access to the learning environment. Accommodations require student advocacy. And if there's one thing you can do with your students right now is getting them to teach them how to advocate now for their accommodations. They have to know what accommodations they're getting. A lot of our students at the high school level don't even know that they're getting them. And I would say that they should be part of the IEP process, and I would absolutely have them being supported in communicating with each one of their teachers at the high school level about that accommodation. Hi, my name is Jack. I have autism, or maybe they're not going to disclose, you don't have to disclose the disability, but you can say, I have a learning need that requires me to have alternative test taking sites. Where is that site going to be for me? Let's work on that together, or something. And you can have their social worker or case manager, somebody scaffolding that with them, role playing it before they do it, coming up with the script, supporting the script with a note card, finding a time. Maybe that case manager or special ed teacher can prep the teacher that's going to be engaged with by the student so that this all goes really well, and maybe in a private setting. So at high school, you've got not a lot of time, every day it's ticking, but you have access and opportunity to figure out, how can we give my kiddo some role playing or some opportunities to practice asking for their accommodation, because you cannot support them in that, or you can't do it for them when it comes to college. They have to be able to do that. Unfortunately for autism, that's a huge barrier. That's part of their disability, and it's something that we've really have looked into. But you can ask, and your student, if he's agreeable, for you to sign off so that you can talk to the counselor. But I'm going to tell you, at U of I, they still don't want to talk to you. Like, they really still want to talk to the student, even if the parent is given consent. So if your student doesn't do that yet, there's no time like today to figure out how you're going to get him to start knowing and advocating for his services. And again, it's up to the student to request that. The Disability Services Office evaluates the request and determines if the requests are supported by the documentation. So you have to have the documentation that they have a disability and that they need that type of support, and the documentation supports it. And so again, students should know about this. Again, the better the student understands their disability and the more aware they are about themselves as a learner, the better prepared they'll be to advocate and request the appropriate accommodation when they enter college. So what about residence halls? Any student in the process of seeking housing on or off campus is protected by fair housing laws and has the right to inquire or apply for and obtain housing free from discrimination. The fair housing laws cover most types of housing, including residence halls, and students with disabilities also have the right to request reasonable accommodations in order to provide equal access and enjoyment to housing. But again, what might that look like in autism? Well, what I've seen most often requested, and over the last few years, I have seen U of I doing a very good job, from the cases I have heard, of freshmen asking for their own bedrooms and being granted that opportunity to have that. I really do generally, it depends on your kiddo. It's a lot to navigate college, and it's a lot to navigate college and a roommate. It can be successful, but it can be a disaster too. So if you think your kiddo is going to do better in their own room, start working on that kind of early, and you can be successful. And I'm not sure, and Jeannie, you've done more of this recently, if they're given a break financially, but maybe not charged for no, they're going to have to pay the whole.
Oh no, I think that you can get a single for a single rate.
For a single rate. They're not going to give you a single for a double rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to holler up for a glass of water. I should have grabbed that. Just a second.
While she's gone, I'm thinking about just my experience. I wanted my son to have a social advantage. So I wanted him to have a roommate. And his roommate situation is actually working out okay, thank goodness. But in hindsight, I think that Linda gave me this advice and I just blew right through it, didn't think of it, didn't pay attention to it, didn't heed it. But he's doing very well socially outside of his roommate. The roommate is not like a best friend. It's not a built-in best friend. And I think as parents, we need to really embrace that before we're sending our child to college. We need to consider their sensory needs. My son's roommate is also probably on the spectrum. I don't think he's diagnosed, but he's in the room all the time and never leaves. And so my son never gets a break. He never is alone and requires some alone time. And I know that that is added to his anxiety. So just, a roommate is not a built-in best friend. And we heard that at the summit this past week too, at the College Autism Summit, that it's not a built-in best friend, that social opportunities will come outside of a roommate. And so if you're thinking, no, you need to have a roommate, that's not a good reason for it.
Yeah. Okay, does the student have to provide documentation of their disability? Yes, and it has to be current. It is reasonable and appropriate for a school to request this to establish the validity of the request for an accommodation and to help identify what accommodations are required. So if you got a kiddo that thinks is flying under the radar and doesn't really like to say they have autism, or maybe hasn't really been told they have autism, this ain't going to work. You know, they really have to know it and own it and be able to say, yep, here's the documentation. I have learning disability. I have autism. I have bipolar. I have whatever it is. So what might you need? The documentation should be completed and signed by a professional familiar with the applicant and the applicant's disability. Those are things like, you know, a physician, a psychologist, a rehab counselor, you know, can't be your next door neighbor. It should verify the disability and suggest the accommodation within it. If previous documentations exist, it'll likely be sufficient unless it's not current. It usually cannot be more than 3 years old. Otherwise, they're going to ask you to go and get new assessments. So this is where that transition planning at school is really important. So having a current IEP, you know, that shows the accommodations that they're getting, you're going to need that for sure, but you're also going to have to show that they took advantage of the accommodations to the best of your ability. Otherwise, what I have heard happen more than not is that parent or the individual goes through all this and then the disability office says, well, why don't you just get started? And then we'll see if you really need that accommodation still. And, you know, you have to help your child navigate that. If you know they're going to get sunk if they don't have this particular accommodation, help them really advocate for that so that they don't go and get sunk and get a quarter behind or, you know, a month behind. And then put, you know, you've all been there with IEPs when the accommodation wasn't in place the next year. Let's see if he needs that this year because last year went so well. Yeah. Okay. Worst idea ever. Okay. And again, you guys can ask questions as we go along. So if you're not clear on something.
I have a question about the documentation.
Yep.
So if they have an IEP that kind of works for some of it, but you have to have something also from a professional. So like, would the case manager's information from the school, would they be considered a professional or does it have to be a doctor?
I think that they could be professional for the accommodation, but they're not a professional for the diagnosis.
Okay, so you'd have to have something from them and also.
So the school psychologist is a professional. So if they have had a psychological assessment by the school psychologist, you know, the for determination of their services, that is good. You know, that's a psychologist. But that's why, you know, you want to start, your son's a junior. This is a perfect time for you to be listening to this presentation because you can start pulling out what documentation you have. You could start, you know, even here with U of I and say, you know, my son is thinking of applying in another year. This is what I have. Is this going to be sufficient or what should I try to get over this next year? And where might I get it from? Can I ask the school, you know, like, is there something that the school could do that's not going to cost me any money over the next year that I can get if I don't have it? Or is there something from his medical doctor that I could get that's not going to cost me anything, you know, before I invest in having to pay, you know, $1,000 for another psychological assessment somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, at school, they've kind of like last time he had a eval, it was just like, well, this is well documented that he has this disability. And so they didn't really do, you know, any more evals. It was just like.
I honestly would take the time.
Yeah.
To go to Parkland and to U of I. That's not terribly hard. I mean, you know, call them and see about getting an appointment with your son or talk to them on the phone, you know, see if how much information you can get out of them about what it is they're going to need compared to what it is that you already have.
Okay.
That's not going to cut it. You're going to need something that looks like this. I mean, this is their job. So, and if you somehow can't figure out who to talk to there, we can help guide you, but you should be able to figure it out by calling the main number and, you know, starting the process. So it is not too soon to do that because all this takes time.
Right.
Yeah. And in the time of COVID, it takes even more time, you know. Okay. So there's issues. Insurance usually does not cover an evaluation in order to receive accommodations in college. You know, they're not going to pay for just a psychological, just to do it. And in some states, the school psychologist evaluation will be insufficient because the school psychologist doesn't have a PhD. Now, in Champaign-Urbana, I think all of our psychologists now have PhDs. So I have not come across somebody doing these that does not have a PhD in my time in Champaign-Urbana. So resolving issues, ask the school's disability office, what do they need? How old? These are the questions you want to ask. How old can the documentation be? What type do you need? What type of person needs to sign off on this? Does a physician's note count? Can you go to your pediatrician and say, will you tell, you know, can you write a note about his diagnoses? Will that count? And then will his IEP count for the accommodations? So start asking those questions. The student, along with the disability office, will together decide what accommodations are needed. And the parent does not need to be part of this process. And actually, they'll do everything in their power to sort of keep you, you know, out of it. If you want to be involved, this needs to be put in writing with the school with permission from your child. If the student believes the school is discriminating against them, they have the right to contact the 504 coordinator, the ADA coordinator, or disability service coordinator to address their concerns. Each school has their own grievance process. And at the very sort of top of the pyramid is filing a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. So that's who governs ADA, if you're really going to go to court over this. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some colleges that have specific autism programs. So, you know, as the awareness of neurodiversity increases, you know, large part by campaigning individuals and their families, programs have emerged at American colleges to address the unique needs of these populations. So these programs vary in their level of intensity and the degree to which they're tailored to the needs of the autistic students. Some of them are sort of more general, and some of them are more like an intense IEP type of program. And you can imagine, we haven't talked about cost yet, but you know, they get very pricey. They almost always require additional fees in the thousands of dollars a year. That's the sad part, to provide that type of intensive support. So programs at colleges that provide extra support, here's some examples. Eastern Illinois University has, it's called STEP, Students with Autism Transitional Education Support. And I'm going to give you an example of the whole like process of how it would work. So first you would apply to Eastern Illinois through the Office of Admissions, not identifying your disability. Once you're accepted, then you would contact the Office of Student Disability Services to provide documentation of an autism spectrum disability. Then you would have to complete the STEP agreement and release forms and get all that set up. The enrollment, when I checked into this last year, was limited to just 20 students that have to go through an interview process. You'd be contacted, you know, if you were accepted by July 1st. And then in the fall of 2019, it was $3,000. I think that was just for the semester. That's just for the semester. But they're getting pretty good reviews. Let me see if this will open. Okay, it's telling me that it's not there. Well, when you get these, you could play around and see if you can find it. But if you Google College Autism Network, U.S. College Programs for Autistic Students, there's a whole list now of programs that are specific for students with autism at the College Autism Network. And if that link isn't particular, well, it was a 2020 link. So the conference just finished this week. I know that they'll have, if you Google College Autism Network, you'll find it. You can also consider technology colleges, that are more targeted to a career, machine tool, truck driving, welding. So there's these other type of post-secondary programs out there. There's post-secondary education programs. So we don't have any of these in Champaign County, unfortunately. But these are post-secondary education programs. They could be inclusive or integrated. Sometimes they're really segregated. They can just be a certificate or they can be a degree program. They're certified as these comprehensive transition programs by meeting certain requirements and standards. And they're designed really for students with intellectual disabilities. And so you have to be able to read at least at a 3rd grade minimum, and also sort of be considered not able to attain a degree with just a regular support. So I think, again, we've established that everybody on this call tonight is not interested in these programs, but it is exciting that they are out there for people with intellectual disabilities, so they could go away from home and have a post-secondary experience that can help them lead to employment and other positive outcomes. They might participate in social activities or academic classes with students without disabilities, sometimes for audit or sometimes for credit if they really can manage it. And classes with other students with disabilities, sometimes referred to sort of life skills or transition classes. And they're getting a lot of employment experiences on and off campus. The more segregated models, they're really, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but they're really separate. But again, there's a really cool one in Wisconsin that's doing great things. It's completely segregated for people with intellectual disabilities, but offering them lots of opportunities for exploring life outside their family home and career options, job options. They can be housed in different places, like University of Iowa has one that, it's housed in a 4-year university, but, parts of it are integrated and parts of it are segregated. So in 2010, the Office of Post-Secondary Education provided financial support for those programs. So until they're still limping along. They're expensive, very, very expensive programs, and but they're starting to be able to get some financial aid. And previously, none of the college financial aid was available for these post-secondary education programs for people with intellectual disability, which was very discriminatory. So they're starting to be able to allow families to, access loan programs and other scholarship programs for those. So these, again, comprehensive transition programs, these are specifically approved by the U.S. Department of Education. And again, they're for students with developmental disabilities who want to continue their academic career and independent living instruction. So they're called comprehensive transition programs if they're actually been approved by the U.S. Department of Education. And these are some that are in Illinois. These are the only ones that are in Illinois, actually. We have just these 5. National Lewis has a program called PACE. Judson University in Elgin has a program called RISE. Elmhurst College has one. Lewis and Clark Community College in Godfrey, Illinois, and that HALO program at Heartland are programs that are that qualify. Again, our closest is the HALO program in Heartland. Many years ago, a group of us, when HALO was just getting started, we tried to get Parkland to also start a program similar to HALO, and they refused. So that was sad. They didn't want students with intellectual disabilities on their campus. So it was super frustrating. So there is a movement to get, those programs are usually 2-year programs, and there's a movement to try and get them to expand to 4-year programs. So how do you pay for these? If a student attends a college, can federal financial aid help pay the cost? If a student attends a CTP, so it's yes and yes for both of those. So definitely for a college program where a student's degree seeking, you know that already. And definitely if a student's attending an approved comprehensive transition program. Students can apply for financial aid through Pell Grants, federal work study, federal supplemental education grants. For those that are going to those special CTP programs, they have to be enrolled or accepted for enrollment in one of those programs. And the school has to participate in the federal student aid program, maintain satisfactory academic progress, and meet the basic federal student aid eligibility requirements. The only exception here is that they don't have to have a high school diploma. They're not required to, and they're not required to be pursuing a degree or certificate. So that is some difference there. So you guys are getting started. I know Colleen, your oldest, is just getting going too. And Andrea, it sounds like this might be your oldest child too. So you haven't done the FAFSA stuff. So applying for funding as early as possible, January 1st of the year, with complete tax information. This is like any student going to college. Within the FAFSA, you need to include your estimated family contribution and costs related to the disability. This is important because this can really, if you have a lot of costs related to disability, this can really help make your financial aid look a little bit better. You need to document the expenses, which may include written statement of explanation by your student, your doctor, or your voc rehab counselor if there's a lot of costs related to the disability. Now, this is a really important factor. So listen up. If you're getting a little bored right now, take a breath and listen up, because you can find money at voc rehab for financial aid that is not based on the family's income. So you must have an impairment that results in a substantial impediment to employment. Autism counts. And you must require VR services for employment. So, okay, let me stop here for a minute. In Illinois, we have a program through vocational rehab that will pay for 2 years for the junior college. It's a special junior college program. And it does not take into account the parent's income. So since everybody here on the call is from Champaign County, if you're wanted to do the Parkland Pathways program and your student has an idea of their career, Andrea, you shared, let's say your son decides he's going to be a computer scientist. So you would contact Voc Rehab, which is over on Neal Avenue, but you should really do this through your school and ask the Voc Rehab person to come to the next IEP meeting. But if somehow they can't, they're too busy, it doesn't work out, it's COVID, it's crazy, you can contact Voc Rehab with your son to talk about them funding their college. So if they go to junior college for 2 years, like I said, your income will not be counted. They have to make a plan for how they're going to achieve college. And it will pay for that, everything for Parkland. It'll pay the tuition, it'll pay their books. They could get that for free. Then after they've completed their 2 years, and let's say they're in the Pathways program, then when they transfer to U of I, they'll engage with the Disability Services Office and the Voc Rehab counselor there. But then, okay, let me also tell you, even though it'll be paid for, you have to do the FAFSA. You have to do it, but they're not going to count it. But then once they go to U of I, let's say, then your income is going to count. So if your income was low enough as a family, then Voc Rehab could also pay for it then. But then they do take into account the family income once they get to the 4-year university. But they definitely could get 2 years of junior college paid for through Voc Rehab. But while they're going to junior college and on the Voc Rehab dime, they can't use Voc Rehab for employment support. So kind of weird, but you can. Okay, any questions about that? But that would be one reason to consider doing a junior college. Now, remember back at, I told you about the TAP, which is not me, program at, I want to say it's not Heartland. It's the one up in Chicago. What was it, Jeannie? Harper, thank you. That autism program is very good. You could get Voc Rehab to pay for Harper College, and your child could go, you know, live maybe in an apartment up there. They might have like what Parkland has, apartments at Harper, I think, you know. So that might be, if they really have a burning desire to go away and want that paid for, that could be possible too. They do have to apply for financial aid. The FAFSA has to be filled out, but they won't take the family's income into consideration for the junior college. All right, this gets a little complicated, but SSI, supplemental security income, there's something called the Plan for Achieving Self-Support. So if you are receiving SSI, it's a way that lets you use some of your income or other things you own to help you reach your work goals. And these funds are not counted on the SSI eligibility determination, and they're not counted in the countable income. So if, and a past plan can be used for tuitions or books. So there are programs out there. If this is a conversation for people that have low income, of how they can save for college and not count against their government benefit. When families are receiving government benefits because of low income, the government is set up to keep them indigent, really. And so they penalize families for saving money at all. So if you've never had to live on government benefits, that's great. And, you know, but if you've had, it's not, the system isn't meant to let you get ahead. But they recognize that, at least in education, and they have something called a PASS plan. So how you can start saving for college and not interfere with your government benefits. So it's a little complicated, but I wanted to mention it just in case there was somebody that this pertained to. Of course, you all know about third-party scholarships, but there's a lot of them out there that have to do with disabilities. So don't overlook those. They might be very underapplied for. So do your homework. If you're looking for money in other places, look for some of those other scholarships that maybe aren't gone after. And there's a list of them there. Here's some more resources. I just put 4 up here that are the most robust resources, so you're not overwhelmed, but lots to know about post-secondary options and other resources related to transition. All right. Questions? Comments? You're overwhelmed? Andrea, any thoughts of what you need to do next?
Well, I went to Parkland 3 years ago, and so I'm a little bit more familiar with their programs. And so I had heard about the Pathways program, and then I did learn that Eastern had that autism program. And so I thought, well, wouldn't that be great? Like if he could go to Parkland and just kind of get like his feet wet kind of thing with the college experience and still be living at home, right? And then potentially like transfer to Eastern where it isn't that far away, so we could still support him if we needed to a little.
And he could get it paid for through Voc Rehab.
Yeah, and I know nothing about that, so that's a good thing to look into. So yeah, and it's given me a lot to think about, and I really just I didn't know where to go further than that. So this is a lot of good information. So
and at Central, have you ever talked to your team about your son having supported work experiences while in high school?
He did do remember the name of the program now. Last year he did this. It was like it supported relationships, work experiences, and something else. But he was part of that program, but because of COVID,
Yeah.
he didn't end up getting. We were going to do like a work experience
Yeah.
this past summer, and it didn't end up working out because of that. So a little bummed about that, but
Yeah.
we have recently talked with his case manager about like inviting career counselor to IEP meeting, or
Definitely.
talking with them, because we have not really talked with them at all. And every time I see something from the career counselor, it's just like so much information, and I'm like, this, I don't even know if any of this would really apply to him, right? So we need to get started, I think, with it. So
Yeah. And getting him doing any kind of little work experiences, even if it's, cutting grass, walking dogs. We
he
really
was
have
wanting to do the park district, wanting to work for the park district this summer. That was kind of what our plan was. So either at the animal farm or at the
cool.
pool, like selling concessions and that kind of
Fantastic.
thing. So yeah.
All those, yeah. Yeah, you're right on target. Really encourage those jobs. And that we find so many families that just, with kids on the spectrum, that just want to focus only on the academics, and they don't have a portfolio built up of those really little beginning jobs, and they have never had a job. They've gone through university and have never had a job, and think that they're going to go straight in and work for Microsoft, and that just ain't happening.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for them to start at square one with, the petting zoo once they have a 4-year university, but they don't have those work skills built up. So you're right on track, Andrea, with what you're thinking and the things that you're doing. And you're right where you need to be for junior year. So
Another consideration, Parkland is so good about accepting high schoolers in classes. And so using the summertime to take a summer school class at Parkland, I think especially if you're planning on trying out Parkland for the first couple of years, just getting them in the door, having them figure out the schedule. They'll be on the radar for the people who provide accommodations. It really is a great way, and then they can do a dual credit class or something like that, something that fits their area of high interest, so it's not academically demanding. But anything that you can do to prepare their brain, because once college starts, I mean, it's full on college, and that transition can be really hard.
anybody else have any other questions or comments?
I will be sending these slides via email. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Jeannie, did you want to talk at all about the programming that we offer, or what do you think we'll have anything for high schoolers in the spring?
This spring, I am offering executive function group work for 4th through 12th graders. It's, just kind of a brief overview of some of the executive skills that it takes to be successful in school in a group setting. I found that my first group was really, it was nice for them to just meet every week and have the accountability to be thinking about the fact that they're going to need to employ strategies to be successful in school. I think it helped all of the participants. So we have that, and we also have social groups with Joan Gorsuch, and I'm not aware, she has a peers group that is accepting high schoolers, and then also a social thinking group, intro to social thinking. And I don't know if that's maybe younger kiddos.
Well, if you're interested in any of our programs, and our programs are free, they're over Zoom, unfortunately, like everything right now, but you can Jeannie, if you didn't put your email in the chat, you could put your email in there and she could add you to her list of interested people for spring programming.
Yeah, I tell you what, when I send you the slides, I will,
It'll be from your email.
yeah,
So
I'll invite you to contact me for that information. The reason Linda brings that up is because the best thing that you can be doing for your student right now is preparing them in how to be independent in schoolwork. Once they're gone, they're so gone. Like they're away at college, and there isn't much you can do to help them. So now's your time. So any resources that you can give them to prepare them to be independent in their schoolwork is a huge leg up.
I just wanted to share real quick. I just looked up what that program was called. It's Care for You. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Care and then the number 4 and you. So it's, I mean, it's somewhat for also like socioeconomic, low socioeconomic students, but you know, it addresses like relationships, work, and finances was the other thing.
So that's what unit 4 is calling that program. Care
well,
for
it's Unit 4 and Urbana also, and I think there's another school, like the alternative schools also participate in it. And it's through like Illinois State University was the one that kind of ran it, but I think it's got like government funding or something like that.
I have a sense that, yeah, that might, yeah.
But it was, I mean, they did a lot of, they did it during school. They met at lunchtime, like once every other week or something like that, and did like education. And then they had the opportunity at the end of the year, if they completed all the classes, to do a class at Parkland or do a work experience. And so, you know, it was a great program. And if we would have got to do the work experience, it would have been better, but.
Great. Good. Well, we're available. We're here. And we're happy to talk through any challenges you encounter along the way. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to help people get unstuck when they're stuck. So don't hesitate. Don't suffer too long in your stuckness before you reach out. We're happy to, you know, keep guiding you through whatever challenges that you face in this realm. So, all right. Well, everybody, hopefully have a good evening, whatever that might look like. We'll go check in with the polls, see what's happening, and wish you all the very best. And
Thank you so much, Linda.
You're welcome. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.